topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Hi there. Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, joining you live from Dallas, Texas, which is home base for me. If you don't know me yet, I'm a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, organizational logotherapist, inspirational speaker, social scientist, and author. My team and I help companies discover and articulate their purpose to third it through culture and operations. We work with forward-thinking or forward-reaching organizations to develop inspirational leaders who create cultures where people actually want to come to work and do their best. And we provide programs like the Grab Your Gusto that enable individual team members to discover and unleash their passion and purpose at work to catalyze fulfillment, engagement, and productivity. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. With us today, are you ready, is T.D. Smyers, a career servant leader with over 30 years of top-level executive experience across all three major economic sectors. He currently leads Simple Leadership Strategies as Chief Executive Officer while maintaining a limited coaching and strategy consultancy for a few select clients. Previously, TD served as President and CEO at United Way of Tarrant County, Regional CEO at the North Texas American Red Cross, and had a 31-year career in the United States Navy, from which he retired in 2011 at the rank of captain. We'll be talking today about the 5 generations in the workforce today, specifically Gen Y and Z, and how leaders can best engage their hearts and minds and elicit their impassioned contributions. He joins us today from the Austin, Texas area. Captain Smyers, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Dr. Cortez, it's good to be here on purpose. So,
right? Let's do this.
I wasn't here by accident, so thanks very much.
You're so welcome. So glad the universe delivered you to me. That's exactly how I see it. We were dancing around conscious capitalism, and you showed up.
I don't get the universe credited with me showing up often, so thank you very much.
Let's take it. So I introduced you. I wanted our listeners and viewers to really understand who you are and the breadth and depth of your experience and your leadership. And you are such a humble man, such an incredibly humble. Ooh, that's a new word. Hungle. But if you would say a little bit more about your background and why is servant leadership so important to you?
Well, Doctor, I've been in leadership my whole life, and I attribute that to not having any marketable skills. I like to tell people,
see,
I'm not a plumber, I'm not an electrician, so I wound up being decent at people. And I was trained at the U.S. Naval Academy. I was a young man growing up in north central Texas, and then got fortunate. By computer error, I got into the U.S. Naval Academy and built a career in the Navy as a Navy flyer. I was a naval flight officer and worked my way up chasing, at that time, Soviet bloc submarines around the world. And there wasn't much call for that on the outside. So when I finally decided right, if you've got any adversarial submarines in your backyard, I'm the guy to call.
Right.
But I built a career in leadership. My final role in the Navy was command of a joint air base. And that allowed me to work with all the forces and just really honed a lot of the skills that I'd been privileged to build in my career. But when I finished up with the Navy in 2011 and decided to retire, inexplicably, the Navy had sent me back to what was essentially my hometown. After a career of wandering the globe, they sent me back to Fort Worth, Texas to command that base, NAS Fort Worth Joint Reserve Base. And when I retired from that role, I wasn't through serving, and rather than kind of ply my Rolodex to the defense contractors like a lot of folks that had my career did, I decided to take what the Navy had taught me for 3+ decades and continue to give back. So I sought leadership roles in the nonprofit sector. Was fortunate to get picked up for a couple of those at the Red Cross and then at United Way of Tarrant County. I stood up a couple of nonprofits myself, and then my wife and I went sailing in a catamaran for 2 years, and went up and down the East Coast to the Bahamas twice, and then down to the Caribbean. It's fashionable now to take a career pause. Who knew I was being fashionable?
You were ahead of the pack.
Hey, it was a life-changing experience, and we grew together as a couple and had the time of our life, and then came back about a year ago, and I started getting into leadership development and coaching again. Trying to take the things that I learned the hard way in the school of hard knocks and help others learn a little easier.
Mm-hmm. And from there, listeners and viewers, if you just can listen to what he just shared, just take that in, where all of this experience and heart comes from. It's just profound. I've had the experience of working with him in person. It's just amazing. So now that we've established a little bit of where your heart and your vision and your perspective comes from, now let's talk about a recent experience that you had. You were moderating a panel around generations, specifically Y and Z, that you really had some pretty tremendous takeaways from. So let's start with a couple of takeaways that you got from that, and then I'll share a couple of mine because I saw the taping of it. What'd you get from
Sure.
that?
Well, the panel was conducted as part of the graduation for Leader Prime, which is Leadership Fort Worth's CEO level course. They put that on for CEOs that are new to Fort Worth or Fort Worth executives who have just been promoted to be the chief executive of an organization. And so I was invited to facilitate a panel, and the three panelists were invited by Leadership Fort Worth. So I got together with them in advance, and we had dinner together. We visited, we talked through a bunch of potential topics. And when you're dealing with a bunch of highly skilled, highly experienced executives, you really need to bring something of value to the table, right? So we talked about it. We decided to call it the 80s called, and they want their top-down leadership back, and make it an exploration of why the command and control model, may have worked when it was designed, or maybe it didn't, but it definitely doesn't apply now, and why it breaks down, and maybe create some bridges to close that gap. And with me were Dr. Tommy Nichols, who's the Associate Professor of Management and the Associate Dean of the School of Business at Texas Wesleyan. He's a great guy. And then Professor Tracy Rocket from TCU. She's Professor of Management Practice there, and she's just taken over their online professional MBA program as the director of that. And by the way, had the coolest supervillain name of anybody on the panel, Professor Rocket.
Right. I loved how you said that. That was so great.
And then Dr. David Mack was our sage. He's been at UT Arlington for a couple of decades, actually led the Goolsby Leadership Academy as director for a decade, and has traveled to China 32 times to teach an executive MBA program there. So we had this incredible talent base of people who had devoted their careers to studying leadership. Matter of fact, Dr. Nichols, his expertise is in generational pedagogy. I had to look up what that was. And it's a teacher of teaching. So I had these great brains who had been the kind of people that wrote the kind of books I read to become a great practitioner of leadership, and a better practitioner of leadership anyway. And so it was, we cracked it open and got into some really cool principles about understanding the generational gap, maybe understanding where there's not necessarily a generational gap, so we don't make too much of it. And then just kind of how to be human. In a field where the new folks into the workforce aren't of your generation, but they're no less human, and in some cases, maybe even are more so.
Mm-hmm. So I'll share a couple of things that I got from that. But before I do, part of the reason, again, that I wanted to have you as my guest talking about this subject, TD, is because as a management consultant working with organizations who are literally battling the Great Resignation currently, it's really difficult to be able to attract and keep talent today. So one of the things that I heard the panel say, and I don't remember which person had said it, was that 60% of any given company is generally has an interest in leaving the organization, finding another job, and 40% of them are actively doing so.
Yeah.
So that's
statistic too. That statistic has been the same for decades. Gallup started looking at this stuff when they published First Break All the Rules about 20 years ago, and that was backed up by 30 years of research. And that number, about 40% of the workforce looking for for a new, actively looking for a new opportunity, directly correlates with the number of managers or leaders in the workforce who are transformational leaders. So that's an interesting and a strong statistic, but it definitely is amplified now in the Great Resignation because people have other opportunities, out there. And it's when I first read about the Great Resignation, Doc, I said that can't be true. People have to eat, right? But people are seeing Gen Z professionals are seeing their friends create businesses and do very well as Gen Z businesses. They're seeing that they can work in a non-traditional career path and do well. They're seeing that they can hang their own shingle and make it work and leverage their understanding of things like marketing and things like online access and just run to the bank with that. So actually it's a really smart group of people that have figured out they have other alternatives than to work somewhere that they don't feel valued or they don't think they're aligned with the mission.
Yeah, and the other thing that I thought was really interesting too about that is, I mean, one, let me back up first and say this. It's not even just what I read that people literally are quitting their jobs before they have something else in hand. That's partly because they've just so had enough and are disconnected from their employers. But two, they feel confident that they can find something else or they can do something else with their talents. I think that's really, really interesting. And the smug people that I've spoken with say, well, that's going to change when the economy turns. And they won't. And so you and I have talked a little bit about that. What does that shake of the head mean for you?
Well, I mean, these are smart people. I mean, I don't want to use the term kids. I feel like I'm going to because I'm not a boomer, by the way. I am a Gen Xer, so I missed the boomer break, but not by much. But the men and women entering the workforce now in Gen Z, and even the younger half of the Gen Y or the millennials, they're smart. And it's funny, one of the statements that was made, it was shared by Dr. Mack, was these folks, they share that they have the same values that we do, but they have more values that we do. And I'll simplify that. We always wanted to work for a mission-focused organization. Who didn't, right? That's part of what got me into the Navy. That's what made me a Navy flyer. I wanted to serve. I wanted to feel like I was part of a mission. But our generation would sacrifice some of that to increase wealth, to provide for our family, to create a legacy, to pursue those things. In this generation, they've got a more, I hesitate to use the word mature, but I'm going to use it, a more developed look at mission and what it means in terms of significance in their lives. And doctor, because of what you do, people that find great wealth sometimes are really depressed and they can't find happiness. And in my experience, the thing that they're missing, that they're lacking, is significance in their life. Finding mission. Well, that's your business, right? Working on purpose, finding purpose, finding a reason that they're there. The Gen Zers entering our workforce, they know that's important, and that's why they prioritize it so highly. So that's kind of why I was shaking my head. I would not dispatch so readily that when the economy changes, that we're going to have people flooding back into the workforce. I think they're doing well for themselves with other alternatives sometimes.
I would agree. A couple of things that you said I want to build on. That's so great. So I have a Gen Zer of my own with me. She's 19 and in college. And as I was preparing for this conversation, I did some research and one of the things that I discovered, since we were focusing specifically on Gen Y and Z, and listeners and viewers, if you don't know, Gen Y is also called millennial. So just to kind of put that to context. So I discovered one of the things is that the Gen Z population is really probably just because of how they've grown and how they've been exposed to so much is really they learn the fastest of really all the generations. So I turned to my daughter and I said, look, so you see that? Cut me some slack. I'm not as fast as you. But to your point, right, they are incredibly wicked smart and they can multitask like crazy, and that we've been taught that's a no-no and that people aren't effective at that, but Gen Z is. And they also are very entrepreneurial. So to your point of seeing their other colleagues going out to start a business and giving it a shot, Very, very interesting. So I like very much already the tone we're establishing here, TD, and that is to be interested and curious and appreciative of the other generations, and not to do what so many of us have generally tended to do, which we talked about before, as to be in any generation and always look at the one coming up behind you saying, oh my God, we're in so much trouble with this next generation coming up, right? No, that's not it.
Yeah. My wife calls that geezing, and she'll catch me doing it sometimes, when I start to complain. But I have to back up and start looking at my own leadership fundamentals. I mean, what are the things that I try to instill in others and that I try to develop in myself? Growth mindset, curiosity, trying to make others better, right? One of the things that we do in simple leadership strategies, one of the things we try to show people is that a transformational leader is somebody who helps others achieve excellence. All those things that I'm out there preaching, if I also start putting them to work in my own understanding of the people I work with that are younger, of the Gen Zers in the workforce, then I start to see these value propositions. I start to open myself up to understanding how they view mission set, how they view significance, how they view their role. One of the most interesting things I think that came out of that panel was when Professor Rocket, mentioned that the phrase "there's no I in team," which I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was big coming up in the military. There is no I in team. It's not about you, right? It's about the mission. It's about the team. It's about the greater good. They see that differently, not worse, differently. They see the I in team, but the I in team is just recognize my contribution as an individual, understand my contribution as an individual. I want to be part of that team. I want to be part of our team success. So it's kind of like they want it both ways. And some folks that were raised like I was by boomers don't necessarily see that. So that's probably the thing that took the most me backing up and looking at my own perspective to understand the value proposition that still leads, and that's not necessarily me focused. I always looked at it as you sound more me focused than we focused. I need you we focused, but it's really both focused.
Mm-hmm. Again, right? Bigger. It's expansive.
Yeah, it's expansive. And to your point, they can handle both of those perspectives, which speaks to their sharp, their stark growth and intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, with that, let's grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Captain T.D. Smyers, a career servant leader with over 30 years of top-level executive experience across all three major economic sectors, who currently leads Simple Leadership Strategies as Chief Executive Officer. We've been talking a bit about our perspectives of the generations in the workforce. After we get back from the break, we're going to start talking about ways to apply it into your leadership. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to the program. Before we get back into it, I want to invite you to take a look at the book that I wrote a couple years ago. It's called Purpose Ignited. It's on Amazon. I wrote it to awaken your passion and inspiration and turn you into an inspirational leader. And it's really designed to help you create those workplaces where people actually want to come to work. So I hope you check it out. If you're just joining the program today, my guest is T.D. Smyers, a career servant leader with over 30 years of top-level executive experience across all three major economic sectors, who currently leads Simple Leadership Strategies as Chief Executive Officer. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So continuing where we left off, T.D., there's so much more that I want to extract out of you here. So, right, one of the things that you said, You're going to
No,
say?
you're welcome to whatever I've got. So go,
Okay.
Doc.
All right. That's it. I'll get the scalpel. Um, so one of the things that you said in our conversation before we got on air together, that I thought was really interesting is you said younger members in the workforce, those maybe Ys and Zs, can be adverse to risk. And I thought that was interesting. You started talking about your career flying planes, of course, and that's operational risk mitigation. So would you say more about this whole notion of why they might be afraid of risk and what we can do to sort of help to close that gap?
Well, I think a lot of folks in my generation, right, our generation, Gen Xers and even boomers, kind of had this idea that the quote, kids growing up these days have got it so easy, right? And but when you look at the kind of things they've been grappling with, especially recently, and the stuff they're constantly fed, it's it's difficult stuff about the economy, about the climate. I mean, there are kids thinking they're not going to make it for the, they got a couple more years on this planet because
Mm-hmm.
everything's going to go away. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's not to say climate change is a significant thing we need to be concerned about, but some of that is very inflammatory. And so these kids have grown up in a very difficult sometimes environment in terms of peace and in terms of being accepting of the risk that's in front of them. When I was in the military, I mean, we flew airplanes, sometimes off aircraft carriers, and all the time over water with weapons on board, putting ourselves at risk because we would get shot at too. There's nothing about that that's safe. I mean, everything about it is
Right.
unsafe, right? So we grew up with the concept that you can never get rid of all the risk. That's just impossible when you're flying a military aircraft. But what you can do is you can manage it. We had the process we used was called operational risk management, or ORM. And the idea was identifying those risks and putting methods in place to mitigate their severity. So we got used to dealing with risk every day. Dealing with risk was a daily thing with me, and being able to mitigate it. So, and I'm not the only one. I mean, risk is present in business. And of course, it's not life or death risk. Sometimes it's quarterly profit risk. But the point is, the concept of risk management for those of us in Gen X, it's not foreign to us. But that's one thing that I think we can share with our Gen Z and millennial workforce, is the ability to manage and handle risk, because sometimes it can be pretty scary for them in terms of approaching their vocation. And we have methods, and that's just one of many things that we have methods to deal with that we can impart on them and be of value in terms of helping them to become, let's face it, they're our successors. So let's
Mm-hmm.
help them get there and do it well.
Mm-hmm. That's embolden and enable them. Absolutely. And at the same time, learn and be inspired from them as well. Right. I
Sure.
love the two-way exchange here. And so one of the things that you and I also talked about that I think is really, really interesting is I love the notion of reaching across the aisle to other people, other organizations, et cetera. And you told me a little bit of a story about this. I think actually you didn't tell it. It was one of the people on the panel. Maybe it was, I'm not sure. But it was this whole notion about the hospital trying to
Oh, yeah.
make the MRIs more friendly and accessible to kids. Can you share
Yeah.
that story?
Sure. That was Dr. Mack, and he told it was a great example of adaptive leadership. Well, it's actually an adaptive response to fear, but he told it to illustrate adaptive leadership and get that idea in everybody's head. But the story goes, and it's true. It's happened all across the country. MRIs are a scary, scary thing. They're scary for us as adults, but for kids, imagine that you have to sit very, very still in this tube while we put you into a cave and do things to you don't understand. I mean, that's terrifying.
And it's
And
loud too, isn't it? Loud?
yeah, exactly. There's bumping and things, you don't know what's happening, and your fear for your life.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. I'm almost 60 years old. But imagine that you're a kid going through that. So what happens a lot of times is these offices, these hospitals will drug the kids so that they're sedated, and then they can go in and get it done. Well, an enterprising bunch of hospital professionals came up with the concept of creating a facade for their MRI machine that was a pirate ship. And they put an eye patch on the next kid that went through, and they told them the story. Okay, we've got to defend the ship, and she's going to be under attack. And your job, I'm going to shift out of my pirate mode for just a minute until September. Let's talk like a pirate day. But Well, your job is going to be to hide and be as quiet as you can so they can't find you. And then we'll pull you out when it's time to leave the ship and attack their ship, right? So now it's a game. It's a role play, and the kid's into it, and he's got his eye patch, and he's excited about it, and he holds really, really still. And they get the job done. And then the kid comes out. And guess what? Next time he needs to come back for an MRI, he comes back for an MRI. And adults should do it that way. But the whole point was taking a situation that can be really difficult and hard and scary and just adapting your approach to it and turning it into something that's inviting and fun. And by the way, successful. So I thought that was a great story that Dr. Mack brought home, and a superb example of things we can do to make an inviting work environment, to accept a little fun, to accept maybe something that's on a little non-traditional rail than we grew up with. I used to make fun of the beanbag chairs and the ping pong tables and things like that when they started to enter into the workspace, but it's similarly, that was an adaptive environment. I mean, when you have a workforce that can decide whether they want to come to work or go to Thursday morning yoga, at a certain period of time, which they can, they'll do it. And my attitude used to be, well, no, they can't do it. I'll find somebody else. No, guess what? They'll find somebody else, because there's plenty of people out there looking for good talent, especially today, that'll make those allowances. So they don't have to work for you. The workplace has changed. The generations that make up the workplace, their expectations of what vocation means have changed. Mm-hmm. So you can expect them to change, but the truth is, we have to.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And I want to build on what you said there, TD. It's so beautiful. I love that example, which is why I wanted you to share it. And some of the viewers and listeners are gonna probably hear that is, wow, that sounds like a lot of work to try to get the job done. It is. And in the work of that, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? You expand and grow and enlarge yourselves by being that adaptive leader. And you take that same information, that same knowledge, and you transport it into other parts of your business, and you're more successful, as like TD said. So I really like to be able just to showcase that, just how much, when we really reach across the aisle and work with each other across these different generations, how everybody wins, everybody gets bigger, everybody gets stronger.
Yeah, and that's really not foreign to our understanding. We just have to apply it.
Right.
We've always told ourselves, and sometimes maybe we've been placating ourselves, but we've always told ourselves, a true leader never stops growing, because when you stop growing, you start dying, right? But if we really take a growth mindset, then this is exactly the kind of thing we're doing. Is it extra work? Was leadership ever promised to be a cakewalk? No. So you can spend your time being creative and curious and growing, or you can spend your time recovering and worrying and mitigating mistakes. There's your choice.
Well, I love your beautiful, optimistic, open growth mindset, and I align with that. And I have met many leaders who are very resistant to the incoming generations. They find them. I think it was Mackey who said that, describing how people experience Gen Zers as coming to us. Oh my gosh, they're coming at us. They're coming to us. And yet, and they do. And what I love is, each generation seems to have elevated and expanded our consciousness as to what we want from work and what we expect from work. And you said it earlier, the Gen Ys and Zs, they do want that mission. They want meaning, significance, purpose. Yeah. And we did too, but they just insist on it.
Yeah, and they're not willing to compromise. We were willing to compromise for wealth. They're willing to let wealth take a pass or be postponed for a while,
right?
To pursue it. And that's a big difference, I think.
It really is. And what's really interesting today is you use the word significance. So significance relates very much is about meaning. So I'm a meaning and purpose gal. I'm an identity researcher as well. What's fascinating is I also work in Spanish and Portuguese. So in Spanish, meaning is significado and purpose is propósito. So you start to see that beautiful connection, right? It's all right there. And, I work with this organization now, and they have a lot of Gen Y and just a few Gen Zs, and everything is about diversity and inclusion, reaching across the aisle, standing for ESG, taking a stand on ESG initiatives, doing something with sustainability and climate change, and they want their leaders to speak. And this is becoming harder for leaders in the more of the Gen X and the boomer category because they maybe want a more private sort of perspective on that. But what's happening is the workforce and buyers are voting with their pocketbooks and their feet. And so, it's really, really, really interesting to see that they're kind of being pushed up into that space. And again, I think it's enlarging. It's probably scary as all get out, but it's enlarging.
Yeah, concur. You mentioned, something that two of my panelists really they said things that resonate with me, but it was the concept of, of feedback, of wanting feedback and accepting feedback. And by the way, that was a misconception I had, was that Gen Z, they don't care what we think about anything. That's really not true. They don't expect to be the CEO tomorrow unless they get out, and start their own company. And they're seeing some of their friends do that and be very successful in that. I'll tell you a story to illustrate what I'm talking about. When I was at the American Red Cross, I had a young marketing professional come in my office, and she had only been there about 15 months. But she asked my assistant if she could see some. She wanted to talk to the CEO. And so we give her some time, and she came in the office and talked to me. And I said, "Hey, we'll make up her name is Karen." I said, "Karen, how are you doing? Love what I'm seeing from your work. What can I do for you today?" And she says, "Well, TD, I've been here 18 months. Well, she'd been there 15 months, but she said, I've been here 18 months and I'm not a director yet. And I don't understand why." And I shared this at the panel. I thought I was being punked. I'm looking for the cameras thinking, this isn't a real question, because in my world, you're not a director for years. And it takes what we call sustained superior performance, right? To continually come to the trough and produce and perform and prove your worth and your value. And she was expecting it after, not even a year and a half there. So, that set me back. But what it taught me is I don't understand that perspective. I don't understand what that's about. But I can't. Subsequently, the folks in the panel helped me wrap my head around it. Do they want feedback on their performance? Yes, they do. How do they want it? Frequent. Well, they get it all the time, right? From can't find my phone now. I was going to hold it up, but from the cell phones, they've got a feedback. They're born with a feedback mechanism in their hand. And so they constantly want to hear how they're doing, what we're doing, what they're involved in, and why. The questions they ask: why are we doing that? Why are we doing it that way? They're not meant to be disrespectful. They're growth questions. Yeah. Right. And then Professor Rocket was the one that brought up something that will really stick with me in terms of performance evaluation and things afterwards. They don't like to be surprised by that feedback. Yeah. So they appreciate some kind of note in writing in advance. This is what we're going to talk about when we meet at your performance appraisal coming up. Then they've got time to process it and be prepared when they come in. And by the way, in my opinion, that's kind of a best practice that you should have been doing all along anyway. Right. Right. But to them, it's valuable. So that's kind of a long way to tell a story about that. But those are some of the things that I picked up from the panel that I find extremely helpful.
Wonderful. Let's grab our last break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with T.D. Smyers. He is a career servant leader with over 30 years of top-level executive experience across all three major economic sectors, who currently leads Simple Leadership Strategies as Chief Executive Officer. We've been talking a bit about both of our perspectives and what we've learned about Gen Y and Gen Z. After the break, in the final segment, we're going to talk about a few behavioral tips for leading teams comprised of Gen Zers and some Yers. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at EliseCortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Welcome back to the program. I'd like to invite one more bit of news here for you, actually one more bit of news, and that is in August of 2021, we got out the Passionately Striving and Why collection that I curated. What I did was I literally scoured the world to find 25 women who would share their intimate stories of discovering their purpose and how they're serving from it today. So we have stories from Australia to Zambia. So I hope you'll check that out as well. I'm actually almost more proud of that book than I am my first book. And by the way, I'm also recruiting for men. So if you know any men who are really living their purpose, I'd love to talk to them. If you're just joining in today, my guest is T.D. Smyers. He's a career servant leader with over 30 years of top-level executive experience across all three major economic sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So for this last bit here, I love that we're going to finish off here, TD, with some practical tips to what do I do about all this stuff. You guys have been teaching me. I'm aware now that I need to have an open growth mindset. But now what do I do? Because managing different generations is difficult. You have to reach across the aisle, and it means that you're dealing with somebody with different values, different preferences. So that takes something. So I like, TD, already that what you situated when we were talking about this is that you wanted to be able to offer a positive psychology perspective. That means that we're shifting our thoughts and beliefs first. And I think that shifting piece is important. So you gave me, I think, 4 things that you had for ideas. So I want to talk through them, but you had something first you were going to say?
No, I mean, the idea that thoughts and beliefs have to change before behaviors have to change, that's also nothing new. And that's kind of a theme here, by the way. You know, we're talking about managing a workforce whose experiences are different than ours, whose thoughts are different than ours. I mean, has that not been the case since the beginning of recorded time, right? So,
It sure has.
So, I mean, I found myself, and again, I resemble that remark, right? My perspectives about a Gen Z workforce and younger millennials have been very limiting. My beliefs of them have been limiting. My expectations have been low, and I found myself, humored at what I thought was their laziness and their silliness and all that kind of stuff. But learning and starting to take my own self less seriously, right? That was a good first step. And then stepping back and understanding that, hey, good leadership's about growth, understanding your team, empowering your team. You can't just delegate, you have to empower and resourcing them for success. And if I'm serious about that, then I'm going to pick up some tips. I'm going to listen to some smart people who have studied this stuff. And I'm going to pay attention and I'm going to start making it happen. And that's how I came up with the things that we're going to be chatting about.
Yeah. So the first one you already mentioned. You mentioned that, one way to start intervening with your thoughts and your beliefs is to stop thinking of especially the Z generation, also the Y, as the lazy generation. So say more about that.
Yeah, because they're not, because they work really, one of the things that I've been privileged in my life to be able to do, I'm a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and I've had the opportunity to serve on boards for 2 Congress people for selecting candidates for all the service academies. You want to talk about an experience in humility, meeting the professional young men and women who are applying to the service academies today. Focused, hardworking, smart. My first thought, and everybody that sat on the panel with me shared it, is I'm glad I didn't have to compete with this group when I was going through, right? So, one of the things is losing the concept of laziness because you don't understand their motivation.
Mm-hmm.
You're lazy if you don't work to understand their motivation as a leader who's accountable for that. Right. So that was the first thing to me that was like, boom, the scales falling off my eyes. And it's like, man, I have definitely got to get my head around how to now inspire. By the way, motivation, it can be done through a lot of ways. You can be coerced. Coercion is motivation. So real quick, one small story. You can stop me, Doc, if I go too much.
I love your stories. Go for it.
So at the Naval Academy, I did not shave for morning formation one time. Now, I was 17 years old. I barely had peach fuzz. I figured I could get away with it. I was in a hurry. So I go down there, and sure enough, the inspecting officer says, Mitch Myers, did you shave? And of course, one thing you don't do at the U.S. Naval Academy is you don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't steal, because that's one-way ticket out of there within 24 hours. So I said, no, sir, I did not shave. So he said, well, you're on restriction. So that night, my restriction, I was in the class of 1984. So my punishment was to hold a rifle over my head and do 84 laps through the courtyard.
Wow.
And if my elbows buckled during those 84 laps, I had to begin at lap 1 and do it again. So was I motivated to get those 84 laps done? Yes, I was. But was I inspired? No. Marching with a rifle over my head did not be the cause of my life or my purpose, right? So we have to understand the difference between motivation and inspiration. This generation wants to be inspired by mission, by significance, by a higher calling, because it fills a void inside them. You and I talked briefly as we were preparing for this about, a world which is largely secular, which is, a former generation, 3 or 4 former generations, really maybe they rallied around their faith, but in a world where some of that is gone by the wayside, folks tend to, Gen Z and millennials they have this need still to have value, to have virtue, to demonstrate something like that. So I think they're really prone to feed into a noble, honorable mission that they can wrap their head around and understand why it's good for the world. Which, by the way, is supposed to be what a transformational leader does too, right? Makes the individual, the organization, and the world a better place.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is just so my jam, TD. So I love it. Just so my jam. All right. The second thing that you talked about as we were talking about preparing for this is that another important thing is to expand your already strong understanding of the power of reward and recognition to include identity. As an identity researcher, of course, this is really compelling to me. Identity is so powerful. So identity speaks to who am I and who should I become?
Yeah. And who am I on the team?
Mm-hmm.
What is my role on the team? So we've always known that reward and recognition were important. When I, quote, grew up as a leader, and it was in the U.S. Navy, it was always about contributing to a team. And when the team got recognition, I got recognition. I think the shift is now that I believe in the team. I'm a Gen Zer now. I believe in the team. I want to be part of the team. I want to help the team achieve. I also want to be recognized for who I am and my contribution to the team that's unique and individual. A subtle shift. And by the way, none of the team is lost in that shift. It just gains an I, or who I am as an individual. And Doc, I got to tell you, I'm a convert because I have come at this detesting identity politics and how it played, in my opinion, at the time against unity of effort. Unity of effort was always what was crucial, in terms of success. The team achieves this together, not you as an individual. But I've come to the understanding that they are not mutually exclusive. And an adept leader can help forge strong individual identities into a strong team identity and leverage that going forward. So that's what I meant by that.
Well, and so what I would add to that I certainly teach in my leadership programs, my management programs, is that, develop your capacity as a leader to develop insane curiosity, to go looking for what's special and different about each one of your team members, and then celebrate that, draw that out. Very often they don't know this about themselves. You help them discover that. And that is enlivening for them. And they feel more committed and connected to you. And it's beautiful to get to do that, right? So to me, that's also what identity speaks to.
That's an awesome statement too. Insane curiosity. I like that.
Actually, practice insane curiosity, please. All right, we have a few minutes left here. I want to get through 2 more of the things that you said. So you also talk about empowering your Gen Zers to run with their strengths, which will probably fill in your own gaps. Amen. Say more about that.
Right. Well, it's always been important for leaders to understand where they're strong and where they're weak. We have assessments that we invest in to do that, plus a lifetime of understanding. You just have to be intellectually honest with yourself. And if you are, you have Gen Zers who can fill those gaps, and we have them. They're smarter with technology. They're quicker with collaboration and to see ties between disciplines. So these kind of things, you can leverage their strengths, understand that they're your weaknesses, and recognize them. That's a key into the last one we talked about, right? Is give them the opportunity, give them the resources, and give them the authority, not just the responsibility, but the authority to pull those things off, and then recognize them when they achieve it.
Hmm. Yes, indeed. And then the last thing that you talked about, which is really, I think, quite beautiful. Again, this goes back to each of us, all of us as individuals in the workforce, leaders and followers, to be able to help each other. And so you talk about resourcing your Gen Zers with the perspectives you've earned, that is, you being more of the Gen Xers and the Boomers, through a successful career to fill in their gaps in some key areas. The first one you talk about is trust building. Tell me
Yeah.
more about that.
Well, they know that they need to grow, and they know that they innately know that trust is important. It's important to them. But one thing that young people in any generation have been at a deficit for is understanding how to build that trust.
Sure. Hmm.
One thing that we can share after a lifetime of building trust and destroying trust and rebuilding trust and all of the things that we've been through for decades, literally, we can now impart on them with some wisdom. They are not lacking in intelligence. They're definitely not lacking in information. They're kicking our butts in information every day.
Right.
But one thing we possess through the School of Hard Knocks that we can impart onto them and that they're wanting is wisdom.
Hmm.
So the ability to understand how to build and keep trust plays really well into what they already want to do. So those kind of things in terms of, building trust and managing risk and creating relationship, that only somebody who's done this for a long time and failed at it sometimes and then picked themselves up and succeeded again, they understand the benefit of that and they're open to it if we'll be open to giving it to them.
Yeah, the second thing you mentioned to help to teach them was risk management, which we did talk about before, but did you want to say more about that as well?
Well, it's important because they're again, these are people who have grown up in scary times.
Yeah.
We joke about that when we were young and we had to, get under our desk because the Russians were going to bomb us, and that was some fear. We had some scary times. It is nothing compared to the way that this generation is inundated with really kind of apocalyptic news and expectations. So, that's an important aspect of creating for them an understanding of risk, maybe an ability to handle it, not just in terms of the world around them, but also in terms of business and getting to work that day and the kind of things that they deal with every day. And risk mitigation is something that our generation can pass on to them.
Agreed. Beautiful. And then third, you talk about career management. How can we help them manage their careers?
Well, like Karen, the story I told earlier about the digital marketer who came to me expecting to be a director after less than a year and a half. Those kind of expectations, they need to know what the wickets are. They need to know where they need to put their strengths when they spend their time and what they can expect coming up. And maybe they need to move out to move up in some organizations. I think in a workforce like this, we need to be okay being the Pittsburgh Pirates of our industry and raising up great talent to find it going elsewhere. If you're in that kind of a space, you're never at a disadvantage because all of the new talent wants to be where you are because they know you'll develop them and they'll have great propulsion into a successful career ahead that delivers for them both some level of personal wealth, but most importantly, a meaningful life in existence.
Amen. Okay, then finally, very quickly, if you could, you also talk about the need to teach them sustainable performance.
Yeah, it's not about one-time performance or a flash in the pan, and that's probably one downside I think of the younger generation is they kind of feel like, hey, I've shown you what I can do. Well, it's about sustainable performance. You need to do it more than once. We have that old term, one-trick pony. It's probably a good idea for us to help them understand what that means and the opportunities for them to cross-train, to grow themselves. I mean, growth mindset is a baton in a relay that you hand on to the next generation. And if we can create in them the kind of growth mindset that I've obviously had to take on the difficult way, then that's a huge gift to empower them for success down the line in their careers.
I think that is an amazing way to close the show, TD. I can't tell you how much I appreciate knowing you, having you in my life, and getting to share with my listeners and viewers. But did you want to say something, say in 15 seconds, to leave the listeners and viewers with?
everything that our Gen Z and millennial workforce have to deal with, I think one of the best things we can do is be an ally. Take them on, be an ally, and help them get through it and plan their careers, benefiting from the path that we've trod before them. Thanks,
Beautiful.
Doctor. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's so great to have you on. Thank you so much for being with me, TD. Appreciate you.
It's fun.
It was fun. Darn it. Should be like that. Listeners, viewers, if you want to learn more about this amazing man that you've been paying attention to and listening to for the last, say, 50 minutes, you can go to a couple websites. You can go to simpleleadershipstrategies.com, or you can go to aboldleader.com. Either one, you'll be able to get in touch with this man. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on the air with Roger Steinkruger, who retired in January 2019 after completing over 50 years in healthcare, serving as a hospital CEO for 25 years of them. He's the author of Inspiration Universal and Unlimited: Motivation Scatters, Inspiration Gathers. We talked about his lens on inspiring, loving servant leadership and some of his recommended leadership applications you can bring to your own organization. Next week, we'll be on the air with John Baird and Edward Sullivan, talking about their new book, Leading with Heart: 5 Conversations that Unlock Creativity, Purpose, and Results. See you there. And remember that work is a very significant part of life. And if you're not fulfilled there, it's almost statistically impossible to be fulfilled in your overall life. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.